a couple weeks before my 40th birthday, we were at the lake and I got a rash on my face and thought, what's going on? I must have caught something in the lake. Take Benadryl for, a while, and then realized that I had shingles on my head. So it took out my vision and hearing in my right ear. I got the vision back, but it took a big chunk of the hearing out of my right ear. So I had daughters at home with tiny little voices and couldn't hear them anymore. So I had to go to the audiologist, and that's when I started wearing hearing aids.
Welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You've got Logan Jones here. And for today's episode, I got to sit down with Jeff Cummins, who is the co-founder of Immersive Hearing Technologies. Now, Jeff was just about to turn 40 when a case of the shingles in his head took his hearing in one ear. As he described it, his hearing was reduced to about a third of what it used to be, which made it difficult to hear his two little girls. And that's when he started having to wear hearing aids. And what eventually led him to teaming up with researchers from the University of Louisville to commercialize their research and co-found Immersive Hearing Technologies. Now, Immersive builds tools that let people actually hear what their hearing aids will sound like before they spend between $4,000 to $6,000 on them. It gives hearing aid companies a way to demonstrate their technology in a variety of settings right within the audiologist's office. And it's a problem that Jeff understood personally after having to buy hearing aids himself. But this is not Jeff's first foray into the startup world. He spent 25 years collecting experience at various startups and working in university research commercialization. He helped build a dust collection product. In the early days of the internet, he even got to work on putting trade publications online. He helped scale a car key company from 15 million in revenue to over 70 million, and even worked on a cardiology software venture that got him meetings at the top of Philips and Siemens before ultimately failing. We cover all of it in this conversation: the winding road to becoming a founder, what it takes to commercialize university research, and how he's leveraged Kentucky Innovation's resources like the SBIR matching funds, Keyhorse Capital, and the STEP grant program to build a company that's now deploying in Western Europe. Before we get into this conversation with Jeff, a quick word from our sponsors. Before we highlight our sponsors, we just like to state that the views and content shared on this platform do not necessarily reflect those of our show sponsors. That being said, Middle Tech is supported by KY Innovation, the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development's Office of Entrepreneurship. KY Innovation exists to support and develop Kentucky's startup ecosystem, and we are proud to be supported by an organization whose mission aligns so closely with ours. If you are a founder building in Kentucky, you need to check out the resources that KY Innovation has to offer. You can find more information by clicking the link in our show notes or going to kyinnovation.com. All right, Jeff, we're super excited to have you on today to hear the story of Immersive. And one of the things that I really like kind of starting the conversation off with when I'm talking to founders is how they identified the problem and kind of how they have, what I like to call founder fit for the company that they're working on. So tell us a little bit about how you found yourself working on this technology that Immersive Hearing Technologies is building.
So I come by a passion for this, honestly. I have severe hearing loss and wear hearing aids. And that's the business we're in here. So we're creating demonstration tools for hearing aids. I have had hearing loss that was not great through most of my life. So from all of the above sort of reasons, like genetics, my older family members wore hearing aids, loud noise exposure, concerts, different things like that. And then in my sort of late 20s, I got tinnitus, which was a sort of ringing in the ears. And went to the audiologist. They're like, yeah, your hearing's not great, but someday you might need some hearing aids, So fast forward a decade or so, a couple weeks before my 40th birthday, we were at the lake and I got a rash on my face and thought, what's going on? I must have caught something in the lake. Take Benadryl for, a while, and then realized that I had shingles on my head. So I got shingles in this top part of my head, and it took out my vision and hearing in my right ear. I got the vision back, but it took a big chunk of the hearing out of my right ear. So I had daughters at home, little girls about this tall, with tiny little voices, and couldn't hear them anymore. So I had to go to the audiologist, and that's when I started wearing hearing aids. So I guess I've been in hearing aids for, 13 years or so now. So
Yeah, I'm sure it's, you mentioned kind of being told that, likely you're going to face some hearing loss, but actually facing it earlier than you expected. I mean, what's that like to kind of have a sense and one of your senses taken away in a way like that? I mean, I'm sure that just is a kind of a wake up call of like, wow, how you take it for
Well,
granted while you have it, and then you don't have it, and it's like, oh man, you
you
miss it.
really, yeah. I mean, obviously, it's not ideal, but it's
Yeah,
fortunately, you have four other senses, which is nice, and there are solutions. So hearing aids can help. Hearing aids are not like eyeglasses where they're sort of corrective. You go to the eye doctor the first time and you walk out into the parking lot and you're like, "Hey, there's leaves on the trees." That's great. And it sort of fixes your problem really well. Hearing aids are more of an assistive device, so they can help. They can help. Let's put it that way. And I sort of say, they help in a way. The way I express it sometimes is if I don't have my hearing aids in, I hear about a third of what you're saying. But if I have my hearing aids in, I hear two-thirds. So it's twice as good. So,
yeah, there you go.
try to be optimistic about
Well,
it, right?
absolutely, absolutely. Well, get into the story of meeting your co-founder in Immersive, Matthew Neal.
Yeah.
We'll get into talking to more of your background because you kind of have been all over the place with high growth startups and working in the innovation ecosystem. And there's a lot of good stuff we can talk about there. But you met Matthew when he was building a prototype for Immersive. So take us
That's right.
from that point on, how you kind of
Yeah.
identified what he was building on and saw the potential for it.
Yeah. So Matthew Neal back in 23 was a research scientist at the University of Louisville, and he's a PhD in acoustics. He was working in the Department of Audiology and doing research funded by a company called Sonova. And he had spent the previous years, including back to the pandemic, sort of developing this three-dimensional audio rendering algorithm that was, very a clever way to sort of demonstrate sounds in three dimensions. But it turns out it's a really great way to demonstrate hearing aids. Well, he created a virtual reality system, virtual reality goggles with hearing aids with wires coming out of the back, and it was, sort of the first version of a way to demonstrate how hearing aids sound in different environments. So before that, I was an entrepreneur in residence at the University of Louisville and poking around, doing a lot of different things that we might touch on here in a minute. But some colleagues and people at the university were like, "Hey, you need to go talk to Matthew." A lot of people knew I wore hearing aids, and they said, "You need to go talk to Matthew Neal. He's doing something really cool over there." Well, I went, and I think people were telling Matthew, "Hey, you should talk to Jeff. If you have a commercial idea, he's a startup kind of guy." So we met. I went and went to their lab, and did the virtual reality scene, and with the hearing aids on, wires coming out. So this is an early prototype. And for me, there was just instant value proposition because the ability to sort of understand how a hearing aid's gonna help you is just a really helpful piece of information, right? When you're so you the hearing aids are expensive, and it's a difficult sort of, purchase, right? And I liken it to you're sort of spending, you have to make a decision that affects your whole family, really. Like I call it, you're making a decision to spend the summer vacation money on a device that's going to help you out, right? But it's not a common, everyday financial decision that you encounter. So being able to understand this, having bought a couple sets of hearing aids, that they're $4, 5, $6,000. So this is a big decision. So this initial, look at this technology was really, really impactful for me. I was like, oh yeah. So instant value proposition. I said, Matthew, this is interesting for me. So that was
Well,
sort of how we met.
I'm excited to dig into the company a little bit more because you've got a lot of interesting stories from, your earlier career building other products to now building immersive technologies. And I got to actually test out the software whenever you guys were at Awesome Inc. Demo Day, and can immediately see the value of it for somebody that's trying to evaluate what types of hearing aids and how they're gonna, kind of help them out, stuff like that. But let's get into your road to being a founder. So you've had, kind of a 25-year tour through startups and fast growth companies. And there's some really interesting learnings I feel like we can pull out of there that we got to talk about during our intro call. So let's just kind of start it from the beginning. How did your career get started? And then let's just kind of trace the thread through that led to where you are today.
Yeah, well, you described it pretty well in that opening statement, I think, is you've sort of been all over the place.
Yeah.
So I have a biology degree from Transylvania. I have an MBA from U of L. I thought I might be a doctor, but decided I didn't want to be around, sick people all the time. So
Mm.
I worked at the Department of Biochemistry at the University of Louisville for a little while. Then I became an engineer in dust collection for 6 years. I like to call it particle aerodynamics, which makes it sound much cooler. But that took me to Colorado and back, and that was a really good time in my life. But I returned to Louisville around the advent of the internet. So this was a long time ago, and first company started was a virtual tour company. So we did 360-degree virtual tour images for real estate and digital photography. So web content back when there just wasn't much going on the web. So this was kind of interesting and fun. And a couple other little companies like lead generations companies for real estate. But eventually made my way to work with a company called Networld Media Group, which was a startup, raised an angel round of funding. And we were taking industry trade publications to the internet. So this was magazines going online and, websites and email newsletters and things like that. So to give you an idea, we had one of our industry publications about ATM machines. So ATMs, right? We did $1 million worth of advertising on a website about the ATM industry. So to give you an idea, and then we covered a lot of other industries like digital signage and kiosks and some restaurant segments like fast casual and things like that. So that was a good time. That was an interesting time. We, spent a lot of time launching new verticals and things like that. So it was a lot of learning about an industry and how to get involved in it. And from there, I did a short stretch with GLI in Enterprise Corps, was a part of GLI back, in, I don't know, 2015 or so. And because of my background in sort of a little bit of startups and finance, and so I was a vice president of finance for the Networld Media Group, engineering, that kind of, all this background in finance, engineering, startups. They were looking for a university commercialization person. So this is to help guide technologies out of the university. So I did a stretch at Enterprise Corps and learned a lot about commercialization of technology out of the university. Um, so that was a very interesting part of my life. But then, not long after that, I was hired by Car Keys Express. So this was a company here in town that had this just fantastic idea to solve the pain of car dealerships who were having trouble replacing car keys. So they figured out a super clever way to do that, and we're having real success doing it. I worked with them. I became the CFO and then a strategic accounts guy for them, and I helped them go from about $15 million in revenue to about 70 million in 3 years. So we
Wow.
employed a lot of, just basic, they say they had the great idea and they had a lot of smart people going at that, but we, helped with some just basic business blocking and tackling of cash management. And, I was a guy that would put on a suit. So I could also go talk to some places like Enterprise Rent-A-Car and things like that. So
Sure.
that was real interesting too as well.
I'm curious, just to kind of dig into something before we get on to the next piece of experience here. You've kind of gone through some of these earlier stage, more startup focused, more innovation focused career paths. I'm just curious, like, what drew you to that? You certainly didn't get a degree, I guess, that really would point you into something that's like diving into building companies, but you kind of were attracted to that. Like, what was it that drew you to the startup space, would you say?
That's a good question. What was that fatal mistake? I'm trying to think. No, no, I'm kidding. Well, my father was an entrepreneurial guy. He had several different business.
Yeah.
He bounced around. He was kind of all over the place too, I guess. Might be. I sort of came by it honestly there. He was, a clever sales guy. So when I think back, that's probably what, positioned me sort of subconsciously to be able to do
Mm.
that. But I always just thought, I was just like doing things that I found interesting, which, I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, right? So, I found myself in interesting things to do, and
Yeah.
often that led to things that were innovative and startup-y, So
Do you consider yourself more of a generalist, or do you lean? It sounds like you lean more towards finance and sales, maybe some operations. But how do you kind of view your personal skill set? Do you try and kind of be able to contribute to multiple parts of the business, or do you typically focus on the finance and sales side of things?
the more you mature, the more you know to stay in your lane, I guess.
Sure.
Y-
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that those are the places that I think I'm most qualified and do the best. I love talking to people. I love, technology. I love discussing problems and trying to solve them and value propositions and things like that, which is a lot of that sort of biz dev, salesy side. But
Yeah.
I have training and interest in finance and things like that too. So that certainly doesn't hurt understanding the economics of the
Absolutely.
situation and how to plan and do things like that as well.
This is Camden with Awesome Inc. We are proud to support and celebrate founders across the Bluegrass. Our Fellowship Startup Accelerator and 5 Across Pitch competitions have encouraged and equipped entrepreneurs for over a decade, helping create over 900 jobs for Kentuckians. Start something awesome with Awesome Inc. in 2026.
Yeah, it definitely gives you some added depth in any sort of sales discussion when you can understand the finance and economic side of, kind of what your buyer's going through. But let's take us on into one of these other ventures that you're involved with, which is, I believe it's a V Cardio. Correct me if I'm wrong on the name of that.
No, that's right.
Um,
That's accurate.
but yeah, but it sounds like a super interesting product that you guys were building. So walk us through, what you guys were building and kind of what happened with that venture.
So as I said, I was an entrepreneur in residence at the University of Louisville, and that role is basically try to help faculty members and professors and university people who are spend their life building cool tests and science and things like that. Help them commercialize that. Like how do you take that to the world, right? And that's a life of learning. But I was an entrepreneur in residence. I spent some time working with lots of different people. Well, I was introduced to a chemical engineering professor and Shahab Gafghazi, a cardiologist at the University of Louisville, and they had invented a technology that replaced a process where in interventional cardiology, there's a process where they stick a wire in your heart through a plug in an artery to figure out if you need a stent or not. So this is part of the process, but it's also a little risky and a little expensive and a little takes time and things like that. So they were working on a very clever way to use two images of the heart, create a 3D image of the artery in question, and then use computational fluid dynamics to analyze the blood flow through that artery, then use that information to sort of translate into guidance on stent placement. So essentially, instead of poking a wire through arteries into your heart, you take a picture of the heart, build couple of different pictures so that you could build a 3D model, and then use computational fluid dynamics and really high powered math to quickly evaluate this artery so that our cardiologist would know whether to put a stent in. So binary guidance for stent placement using powerful math is basically what we were doing. So, we came together and it was like, let's go see if we can figure out if there's commercial application for this, which they believed there was, of course. And I went and beat the streets, sort of, let's go find out who cares about this, right? Because it sounds like a great idea, right? So I went to the trade shows, I pounded down doors and made it to, the people that care. So I got to the top of Philips, Coronary, Siemens, the people that make the scanning machines that take the pictures,
Yeah.
the people that you make
Massive
those
companies.
wires and things. So, and they were interested. They're like, yeah, that's very cool. There was already one company that was sort of doing this and held a lot of patents. So these guys, everybody else wanted to get in on this. So, and we had what was a clever mousetrap, so to speak, right? So we made it pretty far. We got, to where they were like, okay, very cool. Let's see a demo. And unfortunately, we weren't able to make it happen well enough, right? Let's put it that way. So this operation,
Sure.
this was the procedure that needed to occur while the patient was on the table, right? So it had to be very accurate and it had to be very fast. So it had to be while
Yep.
the patient
Yep.
was sitting there. So that was the tricky part. Like we could do it accurately and we could do it fast. But the trick was getting those two to come together at the right level of accuracy, fast enough and accurate enough. And we, unfortunately, we worked really hard at it. Some of the successes that we had, we did receive an SBIR grant from the NIH, the National Institute of Health, their coronary division. So we got an SBIR, so we funded some research and some commercialization, and we found some really great mathematicians out of Notre Dame and then out of Princeton. So we were doing some of the coolest math in the world. So reduced order modeling and machine learning corrections and all this kind of cool stuff. So it was very interesting. We took advantage of the matching funds here in the state of Kentucky with that, which I thought which was really good. And we did a lot of good work, but sort of in the end, it wasn't enough. So
An experience.
yeah, it was exciting and it was interesting, right? Fun to talk about. I still enjoy discussing it, right?
Is that one of those things that if it was invented today with the technology that we have with artificial intelligence and machine learning, do you think it would have had a better chance of succeeding?
Well, this was just 3 years ago, right? So
Oh, wow.
we
Okay.
were
I didn't
yeah,
realize it was that recent.
yeah, 3 or 4
Very
years
cool.
ago, 20, right? Or maybe 4 years ago, we started that.
Interesting.
So
Very cool.
we were on the front side of the ASO machine. We were doing reduced order modeling and machine learning correction. So AI is a lot of stuff. Machine learning is one of the practical applications of sort of they call AI. So we had the
Mhm.
beginnings of that, right? Now we didn't have ChatGPT and some of these other models that are going on now. So it's a good question. Has it come that far in 4 years or not? It's quite possible that in the very near
Yeah,
future,
maybe.
there is enough computing power. And I mean, that was another thing. Like we could also, if we had a big enough computer, we could do it, right? That was there's like all these factors that come together. So GPU, a stack of GPU, might be able to
Yeah.
do more and more. So it's a good question.
Super
And,
interesting.
I would say technologies like that are in the future. So, we will all benefit from the ability for increased computing power and AI.
One of the kind of common threads that I'm hearing throughout your career is, well, one of the main common threads is just you working in commercialization, trying to get university research out into the market. I'm curious just your perspective on that and the role that it plays in a startup ecosystem like Louisville's or like Kentucky's more broadly. We've had a lot of founders on the podcast that have commercialized research from the University of Kentucky. You always hear a lot of the kind of pros and cons, or maybe not pros and cons, but just difficulties with commercializing research. So I would love to just hear your perspective, maybe what has improved about that process over time and the role that it plays in a startup ecosystem.
It's a good question. It's tough. I can tell you that. So I'm not exactly sure what's changed. So I had some interesting guidance from really smart people as I came into doing that. Guys like Vic Chadha and other people, Will Metcalf, people like that they helped me out a lot, helped me understand the direction to go. A guy named Josh Nichols. There's a lot of guys that have really helped me. And I certainly didn't figure this out. I was more like coached along the way. So that's important to know. You don't just wake up and know how to do that, for one thing. It's tough because often, these are deep technologies and they're off, sometimes I say they're swinging for the fences compared to some,
Yeah.
other startups. If you're building an app, like you, it's, I'm not, I
Yeah.
don't want to say, I don't want to minimize that at all. Don't get me wrong.
No,
But a
for
lot of
sure,
times
for
this
sure.
science and research is a big haul. You're trying to do something
Yeah.
pretty significant.
Is it fair to say it's like an into one sort of activity, or 0 to 1? Sorry, yeah, 0 to 1 activity versus like 1 to N. If you're familiar with like Peter Thiel's, I think that's the Lean Startup is where that idea is from. It's like 0 to 1 is you're inventing something net new, like it's based off of research, it's based off something
Right.
that doesn't exist in the world
That
yet, way harder to do.
that's
Versus
that's
like
a
an
good
app, it's like it's been done kind of thing.
that's a good way. That's an interesting way to think of it. You're
Yeah.
going, yeah, yeah. So it hasn't been done. You're taking the first steps. It's more like virgin territory than
Yep.
a sort of a modification of an existing thing. So that's tough. The university and atmosphere is different than business sometimes. So you run into different attitudes and perceptions and things like that. So that and it's no one to blame, but that's just the way. That's just a fact of life. So you have to deal with
Yep.
some issues like that. And then funding and things like that. Often you're in for a much bigger fundraise to get something off the ground, especially if there's any
Sure.
regulatory issues, FDA and all that kind of thing. So, so you face a different set of sort of funding rules and opportunities in that arena too. So you're
Yeah.
raising hundreds of millions of dollars in the end. So that's got to be part of the plan from the start, right? You can't bail out into revenue at some point like you can in some other opportunities.
Well, it's a completely different dynamic in terms of building a company and how you fundraise around it and the resources that are available to you. And, talking about things like SBIR funding versus venture capital and when each one kind of comes into the picture. Talk us through, let's get back into Immersive here. You guys, correct me if I'm wrong, you've raised SBIR funding as well for Immersive. Let's start with the funding side of this. So you learned a lot through building your previous ventures and how you funded those and how you went about getting sales for those. Map that onto Immersive and how you guys have approached funding the business and kind of getting the product in some hands of early customers.
Yeah. Well, so we started the company and, a couple of my co-founders, Pavel Zahorik and Matthew Neal, and they were both academics. So qualified and skilled grant writers. So SBIR funding was one option. So we figured we had three ways to sort of fund this thing from the start. One was SBIR funding, one was sort of angel funding, and one was we had a pretty good relationship with a large hearing aid manufacturer. Dr. Zahorik's lab was funded by Sonova, which is the largest hearing aid manufacturer in the world. So they do a significant amount of research in the hearing space. So we had relationships in sort of the research side of that company. So we figured we needed to land a couple of these, right? And we thought SBIR funding, this will be great. Yeah, this is up our alley. Then one of the other two will make happen, right? And we'll do this. So we applied for SBIR funding, and we had the way that works is you sort of submit a grant and it's scored, so by judging panels and things like that, and they come up with a score. And we scored a 24, and our review was like, this is a slam dunk. What a great team. What a great idea. Let's do this. So if you score under 30, you're funded typically is how it works. So we scored 24. So slam dunk, right? At V Cardio, we got a 29, so I'm thinking, and we're funded. So this was, I'm thinking this is a slam dunk. So we waited, waiting to hear back. And ultimately we did not. And at the same time, we're working on our other two funding sources, right? But as part of that, I'm like, we got this great score, thinking this is awesome, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we get back, eventually 10, 11 months later, they come back and say, oh yeah, we're obligated to tell you at this point that you did not get funded. And it was like, what? And they said, well, we're only funding phase 2s this year. So we were, it was a phase 1, SBIR phase 1 application, which is this sort of initial, and then you work your way into a phase 2, which is a larger funding source, and you've made some progress and you go further into commercialization. So this was pretty disappointing for us. So we had these two other opportunities. So it was like, hey, you got to go raise some money and, or land a deal, get some cash in the door. So that's what we did. We had, we were we were fortunate. We were a university startup, and it was just sort of we got an opportunity to get in front of the board of trustees, as, hey, let's show them some commercialization, some cool research and stuff like that. Showed them what we were doing at a trustee meeting. And that got us a lot of attention in the university. So that was helpful. We went about raising an angel round at that point, and there were some people that from that university setting that helped kick that off a little bit. Plus just drawing on, my personal network and just funding and things like that. So, or just raising some angel funds around town kind of thing. So drawing on the personal network as well.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, we had this relationship with Sonova, and we took the system to Chicago and found a champion there. So that was fantastic. Someone that was super interested, like, hey, this is awesome. What you're doing, this is the way it's going to happen in the future, So we found a champion. We did some road showing and some things like that. Ultimately, we were able to create a system for Sonova. They launched a new hearing aid in 24 that used, put a whole separate chip in the hearing aid that did nothing but noise reduction. And that probably won't mean much to your listeners, but that's a big deal. So they sort of took a big step forward, and they needed a demonstration tool to do that. So our immersive hearing aid demonstration is perfect for that, because it essentially allows the patient to listen to how a hearing aid will sound in different environments, right? So this noise reduction technology is a real advancement. The biggest issue that people have with hearing loss is listening in noisy situations. So it's difficult for everyone in a noisy situation, but it's even more difficult for someone with hearing loss. So the newer technology in hearing aids is bringing in noise reduction. So like your AirPods can do noise reduction and things like that. Well, now they can do that. They can do it with hearing aids as well. So they're getting really smart at separating the speech from the background noise. And then they just play, they knock out the background noise and play the speech, right? Maybe it's a little more complicated, and I'm oversimplifying that a little bit, but
Sure. But
this is in the noisy restaurant, right? You're with your friend. This is where you need a hearing aid, right? You're with your friends, you're having interesting conversations. This is when you really want to hear, right? And where it's the most difficult, because you don't want to, this is the place where you most don't want to say, oh, and so anyway, that's
Well, that's super interesting. And to dig in a little bit to how you guys kind of positioned this to the hearing aid company, Sonova. Well, so I guess like what were they doing currently to demo their hearing aids? Like if I needed to go buy some hearing aids, how am I understanding, what the features are, which ones I need? Like what was the kind of current state, and then how did you guys position yourselves to show that it was going to provide a lot of value to the company?
Right. Well, it's very difficult to demonstrate a hearing aid. I mean, typically the way this works in most cases is that you show up, you're wondering, hey, do I have a hearing problem? I probably do. My wife says I can't hear. And you get a hearing test. They play the tones, and you respond by raising your hand, and they come out with hey, if you have a hearing loss, hey, this is your graph, this is your hearing loss, and based on the frequencies that you can hear, higher frequencies are more difficult to hear often, things like that. But then there's really not in the industry a clever way to do this. A lot of times, essentially, they're pulling out the brochure with icons on it and describing to you how a hearing aid will help you. Like this hearing aid does this, has this feature. This hearing aid does this feature. So they're typically sold in like bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. And they start describing how a hearing aid is going to help you. It's going to increase the high frequencies and things like that. So they describe it to you, basically, is one way they do it. The other way is they put hearing aids on you in a quiet room and start talking to you, right? So that's, helpful, right? Like if you have a significant loss, you're noticing a difference. You're like, oh, wow, okay, that's cool. But it's also a challenge because it's not easy to put on a set of hearing aids and have your senses sort of reorganized a little bit. And the final way is just to send you out into the world with some hearing aids, and that has its issues. Partly in that it's a challenge, like it takes your body a month or two to adjust to hearing aids. It's not, again, it's not like glasses. Everything sounds kind of funny, weird, loud, different until your brain sort of acclimates to it. So that's the issues. There hasn't been a good way to do this in the past.
Super interesting. Well, this is kind of a more, I guess, futuristic question, maybe even beyond where you guys are wanting to take immersive. But I do wonder, like, where's hearing aid technology kind of heading into the future? If you have any thoughts on that, as you know, there's like this kind of move to wearable devices, and how can we, kind of weave AI and AI functionality into wearable devices? It seems like hearing aids would be a great wearable to, be able to have an AI assistant in your ear if you wanted, if it gets to that point. Do you have any thoughts on that, or any indications on kind
Yeah.
of where the technology heads into the future?
Well, it is that, like, I've already mentioned that AI, the big thing now is really sort of speech intelligibility. Like, that's what you need more than anything from a hearing aid perspective to
Mhm.
improve your hearing loss. So the more they can improve that sound. Now, it's never going to be perfect, because your brain, you've lost this ability to hear. You're never getting it back. So they can just keep working on improving that speech intelligibility. And a big part of that, the big push right now is this noise reduction. So they're using a smart little chip that has a DNN in it that does nothing but, hey, you want to hear this and you don't want to hear that. So that's where it's at, right? Now, where is it heading? These devices are great. I mean, I'm taking this call on a set of hearing aids, right? So
Yeah.
this is a sweet piece of tech, right? That most people don't realize I have on my head, and I take all my calls on it. It has a fantastic set of microphones and things like that. So, your AirPod, more and more people are wearing AirPods. Well, if you just, I have a set of AirPods, super high tech AirPods in all the time. So that's
Yeah.
all the features you get in a set of AirPods, you get with a set of hearing aids as well. So, integrating that into your life is pretty nice. Honestly, one of the
Yeah.
upsides.
I feel like people don't realize how, you hear hearing aids and you think, for better or for worse, it's like, oh, well, old people are wearing hearing aids. And I
Yeah.
don't mean I don't mean that any offense to anybody that wears hearing aids, but that it is an incredible piece of technology. And more than that, it seems like it would become a platform for more functionality. And I think that's
Yeah.
kind of what we're seeing. And for somebody
Yeah.
like myself that has not thought much about hearing aids other than my dad wearing them, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
well, it makes a lot of sense that that would be more capable than the AirPods that I have in my ear that I wear literally, 75% of the day. So I just think it's a really interesting kind of technology to think, like, where does that go into the future?
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. You mentioned stigma, and that's still a big part of this. A lot of people do not wanna
Sure.
look old, right? I
Yeah.
I started wearing my hearing aids at a time when, uh, as I said, my fortune was made. I had a lovely family, a
Yeah.
wonderful wife, 2 great kids, and, I didn't need to look. The stigma didn't bother me, let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
But a
Yeah. Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
people,
Sure.
as you age, that stigma is an issue. You don't wanna look old, and
Yeah.
even though everyone's aging, so anyway, that's just one of those things. And it's, if I could preach here, that would be, hey, don't be too proud to put on a set of hearing aids, 'cause it's gonna really improve your life if you have a hearing
For
loss.
sure. Well, to kind of wrap up talking about the immersive side of things, can you just talk us through from a business perspective, kind of where the business is at currently? So any current pilots are running, path to like a scalable sort of SaaS model, and what the business model is in general?
Yeah, yeah. So that is ultimately the business model is SaaS. So an audiology clinic would run our technology. What we're creating is a tool that helps audiologists sort of convince patients that it's a good idea to use hearing aids, right? So they get to listen to a
Hmm.
hearing aid in these different scenes. It also gives the ability to differentiate technologies and things like that. So it's a SaaS model. It's a tool. It's an arrow in the quiver of an audiologist to use to help their patients. The current approach is there are, basically 5 main hearing aid manufacturers in the world, and they, drive this business largely. So we are working with them as, cooperation with them to get their hearing aids in our system and to provide applications for them to use to promote their devices and to help people sell their devices. So that's one sort of the top down. The bottom up is this SaaS subscription model to independent audiologists and the people on the street that, could use this. So the actual users. So we are, aggressively attacking both of those, right? We currently we did a nice deal with Sonova last year, and they're currently deploying our licenses in their World of Hearing stores in Western Europe. So we've got licenses going in there, and we're learning a lot there. We're also running pilots and independent audiologists, largely in the region, South Carolina, Kentucky, Ohio. We're running pilots with independent audiologists, and frankly, our technology with Sonova is a nice application, but we're still in this, sort of MVP. We're sort of coming out of this MVP mode where we have, put something on the street and we're learning a lot. So we've come through the last 3 or 4 months of piloting and learned a ton. 26 is us turning all that intelligence, all that data into intelligence and really starting to grow the business. And the strategy is still attack in both directions. So for what it's worth.
Super
That
exciting.
makes sense.
That's
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's when the business really starts to get fun. When you kind of have gone through the MVP phase, you found a little bit of product market fit, you kind of see the path to building a scalable business. I mean, that's super exciting stuff. So congrats to getting to that point, because
Thanks.
getting there in and of itself is a really big deal for a business. To kind of end this section of it, I'm curious if there's any challenges that, like, what would be one of the main challenges that comes to mind that you feel like you guys have overcome, or main things that you kind of have learned through this phase of the business? And this can kind of be anything. It can kind of be something related to building the MVP or going to market or building the team, finding funding, any of those things that kind of come to mind. I like trying to pull out, what is that thing that has kind of stuck with you that you're taking out of this experience?
Yeah. Positioning this as a pain, is something that I'm where my head is today. So initially you think of this as this wonderful tool that's going to help people, and wouldn't they just love to change what they're doing because this is helping, right? But you really have to position this as you have a pain and I'm going to solve it.
Yep.
As wonderful as you think your tool is, and that people will just want to, obviously just, of course I'll want to use that, right? If people don't feel like they have a pain, like, hey, I've been doing it this way for 20 years, then they won't listen, right? So that's an important lesson that I've learned more and more lately. And I mean, I've been learning that lesson for a long time, right? But
Yeah, I was going to say that's a great one, because that's like when you try and commercialize research out of a university, like a lot of the idea is still based around the research and the concept and the idea. But somebody like you kind of has to come in and say, okay, this is a great idea. How do we package that idea up? And this is like a lot of sales and marketing type of activity, but like, how do you package that idea up to show the pain that it's solving, to show the problem that it's solving, and then communicate that in the language of who that prospective buyer is going to be? And then you have to do the activity of figuring out who is the exact person that you need to be talking to, and how do you need to talk to them, and
right.
what are their incentives? And that's like, it's one thing to get the idea and to develop the research. It's another thing to take that research and that idea and then take it to market. So I think that's
exactly right.
one.
That's exactly right. And that's,
Yeah.
you don't want to minimize the difficulty of either of those, right?
No, they're just fundamentally
that's the
different
challenge.
things.
That's the challenge, right?
Yeah. Well, let's get into this last section here, which is just building regionally, building in Kentucky. You went to Transylvania, got an MBA at Louisville. You got to go and spend some time in Colorado, but have largely spent most of your career and your life here in Kentucky. And there are just fundamentally different dynamics to building things here, whether it's building your network or building a company. So I'm just curious how you kind of view how a smaller ecosystem works. The two that I had on our note sheet here is just like how building a network, how building your reputation kind of functions here. But any direction you kind of want to take that, I'm curious your take on what the differences and kind of quirks of building in an ecosystem like ours.
Yeah, that's a good question. It would be a better discussion if I had experience in a different environment, right? But I can
Sure.
tell you what
Yep.
my experience is, right? So I do believe that you have certain opportunities in Kentucky that you don't have in other places, right? And then you have certain challenges, obviously. So a personal network and a reputation can take you a little bit further here, as you mentioned. So that's
Yep.
important. So being a good guy, being a smart guy, being a smart person, and a community member, and all those things carry weight here. So being part of the ecosystem and that kind of thing, helping your fellow co-founders, all those kind of things are helpful, and they pay back. They definitely pay back. So that's an important part of participating around here, right?
Yeah. That's been one
Um,
of my favorite parts of, just to hit on that real quick. Been one of my favorite parts of having the privilege of being part of the startup community in Kentucky and doing this podcast is the podcast really was meant to shed light on people that we're building here, but more than that, be kind of a connective tissue between all
yeah,
the different founders, but the different ecosystems that kind of make up this region. Cause it's like Lexington startup ecosystem, Louisville startup ecosystem, Covington startup ecosystem. Any of those ecosystems on their own are not necessarily going to compete with like a Nashville or an Indianapolis. But if we can find a way to kind of link all of those through relationships and network, then, and think of it more of like the Kentucky startup ecosystem, that's where like I feel like we can, start to hold our own with
yeah,
other regional startup ecosystems. And you just
yeah,
see it's like a rising tide lifts all boats sort of mentality.
yeah,
And I feel like Kentucky does that really well. Just all the
yeah,
different
yeah.
resources, all the different founders, like everyone wants to pour into that sort of idea.
That's right. And there are a lot of good people here. So, and I
Yep.
agree. You pull all those together, it's helpful. But the entrepreneur, you got to go out and pursue all those. It's a
Yep.
great community, but you do have to go take advantage of all those things.
Yep.
We get vote awards and Awesome Inc. And I am probably have taken, and one of the other benefits of Kentucky is there's a great the Cabinet for Economic Development does a great job here, and I might be the
Absolutely.
poster boy for taking advantage of the opportunities there, because I've done a lot of taking advantage of a lot of the opportunities that they provide throughout my
Well,
career.
let's hit on that for a second. Just some of those resources that you would recommend entrepreneurs at least be aware of. Kentucky Innovation through the Cabinet of Economic Development is one of the main sponsors of this podcast, and they have been fantastic to
Kentucky
work with
Innovation.
because they truly care about, seeing innovation thrive in Kentucky, and they see the value of having these types of conversations. So maybe
Yeah,
let's just kind of go through a few of the different resources that are offered through the state. We've hit on SBIR, so we really probably don't need to touch on that too more. Maybe touch on the
yeah.
matching program specifically. But
So
things
the,
like
the the matching funds
KSTC,
is one of the
Keyhorse.
nicest. Matching
Yeah.
funds are one of the nicest in the country. So if you
We've
do
heard
get an
that multiple
SBIR,
times. Yeah.
that's well, it's just extra money. So
Yeah.
that you need
Yeah.
at that stage. I mean, at that stage, the more you can get, the better. So
Yeah.
that's a really great thing. I kind of
And then,
interrupted you, but I'm
no,
sorry.
you're good. You're good. I was just going to say the others being like KSTC is a big one that
Right.
we hear a lot about, kind of, and we don't have to dig too deep into any of these, but just, your experience with them and kind of how you would recommend entrepreneurs engage with them, things like
Yeah.
Keyhorse, stuff like
K,
that.
yeah. Well, KSTC, I've used them for multiple companies to like consulting and SBIR grant writing, and those kind of things can be really, really helpful to help you, you know, put the best application forward for that SBIR. You really need to, because it's a super competitive market. So I've used
Right.
the consulting services, a lot of the, pitch deck, all those kind of things are really good opportunities from KSTC, and they are helpful. And I've used those. They're helpful. They provide fun, small micro sort of funds really early on when you really don't, that can be really helpful to sort of get the engine turning. So KSTC, great. A lot of our business with Immersive is in Europe. So three of the main hearing aid manufacturers are Denmark, and one's in Switzerland. And so a lot, and they're more innovative in this space there. So I have connected with received a STEP award through the I'm sorry, I'm not going to get the name right, but the Trade Commission for the state provides a STEP grant, and they provide funding to help with training in trade and tariffs and things like that, but also funding for travel for sales calls and things like that. So that has been super helpful for Immersive. I've been able to take advantage of this STEP grant, and it's helped us get over across the pond and actually get in front of these customers instead of just, trying to have a Google Meets with them. Right. So, and I believe that's super important to get in front of your customers
Super
and talk to them,
important.
show the level of commitment, show build some relationship. All those things are really important. So that's been great. The STEP Award I'm plugging because that was cool. But, and then Key Horse Capital is great. They're on our cap table in our first round of sort of angel funding. They're kind of like that first check. So this is a really, like I say, get the engine turning, talk to Key Horse about how, if you have the right opportunity for them to fund, they can help get that early money in the door there. And then there's follow-on money. So we're still talking to them. We're working into our second round of funding with Key Horse. So that in this environment of challenging fundraising in 25 and things like that, this has been really helpful for us. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity, and take advantage as much as you can.
Yeah, we always love giving Kelby specifically shout outs on this podcast. He just does a great job with representing Key Horse and representing founders in the state. So
Really
all
great.
great stuff. If you're listening to this and you're a founder, I mean, we cannot recommend enough. Like, there are so many people and so many resources that want to see you succeed in the state of Kentucky. Like, go and take advantage of them. And if you're not sure where to start, reach out to a founder that's done it, like Jeff, or reach out to us, and we'll point you in the right direction. Well, as we wrap up here, always like kind of ending on a forward-looking statement about the company. So as you think about what's next for Immersive over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, you talked about kind of getting into this go-to-market phase, getting out of the MVP sort of thing, but kind of give us your vision as a founder of where you guys are headed in the near future here.
Up and away, man. Up and away. So
That's what we love to hear.
like you said, this go to market at this point, it's, execute. So let's get the revenue. Let's show the traction. We will very likely be scaling and fundraising to scale as we identify our ideal customer profile and our map and things like that. But it's, it's build. And we think that, there's a real opportunity to take a significant market share in this space in our industry and create some real value.
Love it.
So yeah, it's, keep taking one step in front of the next, right? And chugging along here. Here we go.
That's what it's all about. Well, please do keep Mental Tech updated as you guys hit those milestones and keep growing. And we'd love to have you back on to hear an update down the road. Before we let you go, we want to be sure to give you a chance to point listeners towards any channels they can keep up with either you or Immersive, or if there's any ways that listeners could get involved. If you guys start hiring, have any types of clients that if somebody knows somebody, they could point your way, just any sort of way you can plug and put our listeners to work to help you out, please do so.
Yeah, well, we're going from that MVP stage, so we're building our promotional materials and websites and channels and all those things now. So largely we've been plugging along in LinkedIn because that's a pretty solid place to go for us. But that's part of our sort of go-to-market strategy and what we're really working hard on right now. So,
Perfect.
Visit Immersive Hearing Tech in the next month or so. It would be great. We need audiologists. So if you know audiologists, we can help them. And we'd love to talk to them and, help them out with some software. Sweet. Or at the very least, talk to them a little bit, right? So, Logan, I really appreciate you having me on. I thank you very much. It's been fun.